Okay, so today we're gonna be talking about American Horror Story, and I will be making a ranking. So based on the rankings, I will show everyone that between each 9 seasons, I will explain why each ranking or episode where they are. And based on the episodes is also based on the seasons. Now it's not gonna go on the order that everybody expect to be, but I'm just gonna go and explain to you guys why each season is where they are. All right, so at number one, I wanted to start with Colt because Colt was in 2017 and everybody know it had a very heavy emphasis on election theme. So I wanted to get away from that. So, but it was a good season overall. I think the cliffhanger that they left off was kind of very interesting. How Allie became the new scum leader of the new cult leader of the women rights. So I think that I wish, and maybe in the future of American Horror Story, they could, check that season again to see, what else they could connect it with. Because I think that season was interesting, but if they could have made it a way where it had nothing to do with too much political, it would have been a great season. So I will put that season under the neutral season because it wasn't bad. It just had its in betweens. Okay, so the next ranking I will go under would be Freak Show, American Horror Story Freak Show. This season I will give it under a B tier. And the reason why I gave it a B plus B tier was because Jessica Lange did it for me throughout the whole season. Her shenanigans and her narcissistic attitude was just funny to me, and how each corner or each turn she was plotting to get away or basically sell the entire freak show, whereas Dandy wanted to buy the freak show from her. So she just kept bidding off every people that she find that she could just be alone to become like a star to outshine the two twins, the conjoined twins. So but the storyline of Freak Show was very interesting because it actually talked about discrimination against any type of discrimination, and you felt for the characters, and it also had a good connection towards um Asylum, so I give it a higher ranking than Cult. So another thing that I liked about that, they had a lot of David Bowie songs, which I'm a big fan of David Bowie songs, so it's pretty cool that they were able to tie some of the past songs and made it look very 1950, which is also awesome. So that was pretty cool. My next ranking will go to American Horror Story 1984, and I put that under, also I gave it a B ranking. So 1984 has mixed, I would say a mixed emotion for me. It was very short, but then again, it was very interesting how they gave homage to all slasher films, as well as it tried to tie in some other things from other past seasons, but it was just very campy, which is always needed to, but they could have just saved the whole, crazy devilish things outside the season, and it would have been a fun and all right season. One thing about 1984, which I really admire, was that they basically gave us the feeling of 1984. the whole Olympics was going at that time, and how they structured the season from the start. We jumped right into the season, which was pretty cool. So I think 1984 was, when it comes to structurally, I think it was a well-around season. So I might change that and put it on the A tier list. So my next ranking will go to American Horror Story Apocalypse. Now this season is gonna go up to A tier because I believe the only thing that didn't manage to make it S tier was because it was the ending for me. I feel as if they could have added more, which is making Mallory, instead of a supreme, they could have made her a actual angel. The only time we got an angel from American Horror Story was back in season 2, which was um the Angel of Death, and that was probably the only time we got an angel. It would have been very cool to add the biblical part, which I think they did before in past seasons, but I feel as if they wanted to focus more on the the alpha baby and how the witches were going to stop, Michael Langdon, which is pretty cool because this season we started seeing some tie-ins. I feel as if the tie-ins started way before Apocalypse, but I think it really started happening once we got into the crossover season. It really felt like we were watching Days in Future Past because all the episodes were taking from the past instead of, the future. And then even at the end of the season, still had some mysteries. Like, even if they saved the world for one part, how they said it, energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be created. So which means that it shows that technically they didn't really save the world, which means we might get that answer probably in a later season, how they made a mistake. That's why Michael Langdon managed to come back, or even they'll, well, at the end, it's like a restart of season 1 ending, having the new baby as the new Antichrist, which is even crazier. So I think another thing that made it for me for Apocalypse was they definitely had Stevie Nicks moments, and as well as, how we started getting more abilities from the Supreme, and how I think what they should do, maybe in the future American Horror Story, give us the origins of all the Supremes. Because one thing that Ryan Murphy said was that, Lady Gaga's character back in season 6 is the original Supreme, which means that her Supreme, I believe, if you realize closely in season 6, it made you kind of see illusions, but then again, she's able to manipulate her surroundings. So even people that are coming over to the Roanoke land, she was manipulating all of them. And I think that should be something where we could get more in depth in how each supreme, even if they master the seven wonders, but I feel as if they have more interesting ideas of how to create more powerful magic, because Tempest Infinitum was new to a lot of us, and we get to know that there's a supreme that could go back in time. And I think slowly by slowly they will open up more doors and explain more powers of, because even if you master all the seven wonders, I feel like you always have powers that you could do outside of those. So which is pretty cool. And I think, because of the crossover and they managed to save the world, some things that they did were end up ending we wine, which means that Violet never fell in love with Tate, which means that that whole get together never happened, and Behold and Madison never really put everybody to rest. And the only good thing that came out of it was Jessica Lane's character, Constance. She's alive instead of dying. So I think Apocalypse sits at A tier list because it was pretty cool. And I think when that promo was coming out, I was very hyped for it. So that's why it's at number and rank A plus. So my next ranking will be American Horror Story Hotel, and that will go under, I would say, B plus, because after Jessica Lane left and they brought in Lady Gaga, it actually it was a mixed emotion, but overall the season was good. And I think a lot of people enjoys that season as well because I think this was the first time we started seeing that, you know how in one term when they say when something is historic, you can't really tear it down, which means that over time the Hotel Cortez became historic, which means that all the ghosts and ghouls were managed to stay in the hotel forever. But the downside was that, when that season came out, it stopped at 2022. So over time, it built up to where Apocalypse was, where they had to go back in time and fix things because I think one of the witches were stuck in the Cortez, and from then on they had to rewind things. So technically, she never, you know, Gabrielle Sidibe's character never came back to the hotel, which that way it fixed the timeline, which also brought back Misty Day, which is was good in Apocalypse, and Hotel Lady Gaga's character was pretty cool. I think they should give us more information. I know that, it's a virus that made them drink blood and all, but if we're gonna be getting legit vampires in the upcoming season, future season, I want to get more depth. And I don't think we never had werewolves in the seasons before. So the fact that in 1984 had hints of season 10, I think, we could be for a surprise. But Hotel was pretty good because they had even had Devil's Night, which was, I think it was a perfect Halloween season. It talked about how each killer, how they got to their fame, and eventually they always have that same meaning to just show up every night by the leader, which is H.S. Holmes, played by what's his name? Damn. Uh Evan Peters. My bad. But Evan Peters played phenomenal role in that. So which was pretty cool. Okay. So for ranking number 6 ranking for American Horror Story, Roanoke, I put it at a S rank, and I'm gonna tell you guys why. This was probably my most interesting season because a lot of people were like, it was not. But let's ask ourselves this: when you're watching a show on TV, and sometimes it shows, like for example, like the Blair Witch movie, people thought it was so real that the guy that actually did it was actually arrested until he had to release that it was just a film. So Roanoke took an aspect from that where it could show you sometime in reality where sometime what you actually watching, it's not always how you think it is. It might be so real and people might just see it as comedy, and actually it's actually dangerous what's going on. It's just that it doesn't appear like it. And I think Roanoke was probably one of the most interesting seasons because it played off that type of energy where one half we had, a full promotion movie type, you would say, episode. And then as we start unwinding the season, we realized that it was they broke the fourth wall, and eventually they started combining the season into even something more menacing. And the fact that they had ties into, Coven as well as season one, which was already mentioned Roanoke. So it's like everything was played in right in between when Mario Murphy was creating the show, which was pretty awesome. There's a lot of Easter egg in each season. But Roanoke was very, very interesting. Like, and that's why I said the previous two episode um videos that I did focus dependently on season six, how season six is probably one of those seasons where it paid doors to all seasons that might be coming in the future, because all those promotions, if you watch the teaser promotion that were coming up for season six, that's what I mentioned in one of my previous videos, that season six predicted season 10 because of some of the promotions that were coming out, especially the new season, how they have something that's dealing with land by sea and something by sand. And if you look at some of the promotions for season six, it had those two themes. So it's not like something that was just done right then and there. It was planned. So that's why I say season six is probably one of the most interesting seasons, because they actually scared me for the first few episodes. So I had to keep the lights on, which was crazy because this season it got a darker tone, which was needed. Because if you look at the previous American Horror Story works, we never had that type of tone since Asylum days, which was pretty needed for the current energy that was going on. So that's why Roanoke is at number top tier list. Okay, so at number the next American Horror Story that will be coming up will be American Horror Story Murder House. And I put that, you know, at A tier because this was the very first introduction to American Horror Story. We didn't know what it was going to be, but at the end of the day, Murder House paved the way for all seasons. It actually predicted a lot of seasons as well. And let me tell you another thing. American Horror Story Coven had a scene where I think the mom found out that the dad was cheating, and she ended up allergicing him with bees in the car, which kind of indicated Colt was right around the corner, I would say. So you could check that on if you guys have like binge watch it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But Murder House was probably my one of the favorite seasons because we didn't know what American Horror Story was going to be. But over time, as the season rolled out, we realized that it was very interesting how we had like the modern days of, horror houses, but this one was completely different. Like it made you feel for the characters, but at the same time, the history of the house, the history of moving in the house. And it got you thinking, like, whenever it even goes in real life, whenever time like you move into a new house and you don't know the history of the house, make sure you guys check that out because you it's always good to know the history of where you're moving, because if you don't, you don't want to be in surprise and people are just coming out of nowhere in your house and you don't know where these noises are coming from. So it gave you that very haunted feeling, which was pretty cool for introduction to the anthology. And Murder House has some of the creepiest, I would say, backstories for some of the characters. So Murder House, I will put it at A tier because it was the introduction. And I think a lot of people put at, A tier or number one on their list. But I think Murder House, it's on the A tier for a reason because it was an introduction season, and the structure from beginning to end had everything packed. Like at the end of the whole season, we basically cared about each character and why they were doing what they were doing. So except for what's that guy name? Not Tate. When it comes to the dad that was cheating, I just was like, bro, just if you're gonna cheat and then still have someone come over and just say, they're pregnant, and it was kind of funny because in one of the cameo episode of the pilot, he basically moved because of that, which was crazy, and then still managed to make it happen when they got to the new house. And that's what, opened the door for all malevolent things that was happening in the house. And even the house already had history of deaths that happened on the premises, which even fueled the house even more. So that's why Murder House is at A tier. So now that we're down to two more seasons. So at number American Horror Story season 2, Asylum goes at S tier. Asylum was probably the most scariest and grounded season of American Horror Story. It had everything. It had aliens, it had mad scientists, it had crazy religious, it had everything. And it had those things where it kind of makes you understand that, do you think evil are really gone when you think they're gone? Like Dr. Orban, he was amputating people, and basically he thought he was God. He thought that the more he know about the human anatomy, the better he could have just create something even more unique by using someone else's body to just, you know, metaphor the body as well. So it's crazy. And you had probably Jessica Lane's most interesting role, which is Sister Jude. She started as a strict nun, and over time we end up liking her because she started getting more humanized when it comes to feeling for other people around her, the patients that she used to be taking care of. And plus we had a connection to Asylum with Freak Show. We end up seeing how Pepper got into the asylum because, she basically got moved to the asylum, Briarcliff. So which was crazy, and we started seeing how it was a battle between, it was a spiritual battle, but at the same time it's like they were indicating that the aliens are angels, but they don't want to put that yet in this, I would say, in the American Horror Stories universe. But Asylum was one of those seasons where you have to sit and watch and see how even the person that you would think that's defending you are probably the most craziest monsters. So we had a lot of villains in that season. And then you had some villains that are like damage villains. So that was pretty good. And then you had the reporter that basically, Sarah Paulson's character um basically was a reporter, and she basically saved the Briarcliff from basically exposing them for what was going on, which was pretty cool. And anything that has something to do with cruelty and you know has to be exposed. You damaging someone else or a creature or anything. So, but season 2 was very, 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 very good, and that's why it's on S tier because at the end, you basically, the only thing that was missing is like they should have introduced angels and stuff, because if they already started introducing aliens, we had aliens, we had killers that basically was like similar to the Texas Chainsaw. We even had like the um devil himself in the season. So it was crazy. It was crazy. And how he manipulates you to doing bad more bad things, and Asylum was fitting for its time, and that's why it's still one of the best seasons of an American Horror Story. And finally, we have American Horror Story Coven at S tier. Coven was probably my first season that basically defined American Horror Story for me, because the lore of it had a lot of Caribbean um relationship, the Louisiana and all these other practices. If you're from the Caribbeans, you will know what I'm talking about. They had very heavily traditional things that were in American Horror Story. And Coven especially had a lot of interesting, interesting background. They had like one character which was like a mortal racist, I would say. And she basically seeing how the world evolve and how we end up having a black president and stuff, which was she was even more shocked that this is happening at that time. And it kind of gave you a lesson of like sometimes in order for you to move on, you have to respect your past and understand where have you come from and then where are you going in the future. So it was basically a reflection of the passing of older and newer generation. So even if you go down into like how the season was structured, you had, young girls coming in, no, it's like the X-Men, you will put it as. And you had the leader, which is a supreme, and she's basically so powerful, but at the same time her downfall is her power, because if she can't find a successor or anything, she basically would die off, which is crazy. And Coven was one of those seasons where it has this funny moments, and then it has its, I would say, lesson moments. You know, no matter what you do, no matter how you do, you can't really stay in power for long. And some of the main core characters understood that better than anyone. One of my favorite characters on there, well, I have a couple, but um, Jessica Lange's character as Fiona Good, as well as Francis Conmore's character, which is Murder Snow. Those were probably the two funnest characters, because when they're interacting with each other, it's like which one is more angry at each other and who could sneak out a bitchy line first, which was pretty funny, because it was like one is saying that I'm still the leader of the entire coven, and one was like, I don't care because you still get away with things because you abuse your power when we need you the most, which is kind of funny because like it was a back and forth situation. And Coven was very interesting when it comes to the powers that each character had. You had Queenie, which was a Cuban voodoo doll. You had Madison, we had telekinesis, and then you had, all these other, and then you even had Marie Laveau, and you could check her bio and stuff. It basically talks about her practices and stuff, how powerful she was, and how she basically linked herself to the other character just to not really die off, but at the same time had a feud with her counterpart, which is, I would say, the witches, and it was crazy. It was crazy, and we even had witch hunters in the season, and it gave you all around. At the end of the season, it came all together, perfectly. And the Supreme had like one daughter, and we know that Jessica Link's character Fiona Good didn't like Sarah Paulson character, which is Cordelia, and over time that it was like a bond and it's like leaving your power and leaving going to the next person. And from then on, that's why, you know, um they became probably you know, one of the best seasons, I would say, of American Horror Story as well. And season Coven also has a connection to Apocalypse, because those characters came back just to save the world. So, and we even got a warlock version of the witches and Apocalypse, which was very needed. You always have to have a counterpart. But this is my ranking of American Horror Story. Hopefully we'll be back for another ranking like this again. But this time I'll probably structure it based on favorite characters and how come each character has I would say the depths and understanding of each character and why they do what they do. Um, like I said, there was no bad season. There were no like down season or even a C plus season. I think each of the season where I put them, I would say I put them as a fitting season, because especially as a producer or someone that has worked more into a project or so, you know that it takes time for you to produce your work, and you're always learning from past mistakes. So I appreciate that from the creator, Ryan Murphy, because he has given us something that been here for decades and we could still talk about it still this day. So it's pretty cool to have a show that's so cool that you could just jump in and you could just binge watch and enjoy it. So American Horror Story is, like I said, it's one of my favorite series anthology, and there's no bad season. All I could say is each season you could basically learn from something from each season, and you could even apply that, you know, to anywhere. Trust, um, like I said, something by haunted areas. Always double check everything and make sure you check it twice. So, but those are my ranking of American Horror Story. And see you guys soon for the next episode.